Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the School Curriculum Assessment and Accountability Council, known as SCAAC. Today is July 18th, 2023. If you're watching live stream, we thank you for joining us, and we're excited to have a lot of members here. My name is Jana Beth Francis. I am chair of the council, and we are going to get started with roll call. As a reminder for roll call, please make sure to unmute and turn your mic on. Melissa?
Thank you, Jana Beth. When I do call your name, just state your full name and indicate that you are present. Artavia Acklin. Heather Aldridge. Deborah Atherton.
Deborah Atherton, present.
Renee Boss.
Renee Boss, present.
Martha Emmons.
Present.
Chuck Fletcher.
Chuck Fletcher, present.
Jana Beth Francis.
Jana Beth Francis, present.
Leslie Jeffries.
Leslie Jeffries, present.
Lisa Keir. Brenda McGowan.
Brenda McGowan, present.
Kristen Putnam. Jason Reeves.
Jason Reeves, present.
Allison Tammy.
Allison Tammy, present.
Jenny Uri. And Henry Webb. Okay, before I turn it back over to Jana Beth to review our agenda and continue our meeting, just a few reminders about conducting virtual meetings. This meeting must comply with the requirements of the Open Meetings Act, so the public may view the meeting via the link that's provided on the public agenda, which can be viewed on the KDE website. SCAAC members, please ensure that your video is streaming and you can be seen throughout the duration of the meeting. Please also mute your microphone if you're not speaking. However, all of our discussions must be broadcast to the public, so please ensure that your microphone is not on mute when you do speak. For agenda items that require a formal vote, we will conduct a roll call to record the vote of each member. And then every time you speak during the meeting, please unmute your mic, state your name, and take a short pause. That will just give our software some time to recognize you. Then finally, just silence your phones or other electronic devices, anything that might cause a disruption to your sound feed. I'll be taking minutes, and those will be shared with the general public as soon as they are available. Okay, I'll kick it back to you, Jana Beth.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, KDE. Hopefully it's coming through. And what I want to review with you is the topics we're going to cover. We're going to talk about we're going to get an update on the Kentucky United We Learn, information about Portrait of a Learner, and assessment and accountability updates, as well as some standard setting updates. So it's a pretty packed agenda, so we'll get right in and get started. The first thing on your agenda is a review of the minutes from March 21st. So please take a moment to review those minutes if you have not. They are located in the SCAAC meeting agenda folder in Google, and that was sent by Melissa in your invitation reminder for this meeting. Once you've had a second to review the minutes, I do need a motion and a second.
Madam Chair, Chuck Fletcher, make the motion, please.
We have a motion on the floor from Chuck Fletcher. Do we have a second?
I second Jason Reeves.
Thank you, Jason Reeves, with that second. Melissa, do we need to take an actual roll call vote on this?
On this one, we don't need to. If we could just do a show of hands or a yes or no.
Thumbs up, show of hands, all in favor?
In favor. Yes.
Okay, the minutes have been approved. So the very first item we have is an update from the Kentucky United We Learn Council, and Karen Dodd is here along with Audrey Gilbert to share some information. We have one big guiding question, and it's really a neat question, I guess, because we're supposed to be looking for the moonshot. So I'm going to turn it over to Karen and Audrey.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Dodd. I'm going to put a link in the chat real quick because I'm going to be going to this slide as opposed or talking about it, but I'm not going to pull it up. But if you all want to follow along, you'll be able to click on that. So again, I'm Karen Dodd, and I'm the Chief Performance Officer here at the Kentucky Department of Education. I oversee strategic planning and research. And for the past year, I've been the lead KDE member for the Kentucky United We Learn Council. Joining me today is Audrey Gilbert. Audrey is a recent grad from Frankfurt. Is it Frankfurt Independent, Audrey? Yes, okay. She's going to be going off to college in the fall, but she is our chair of the council. So I'm really pleased that she's here with us today, and she's going to be talking about what's been going on with some of the standing committees. But before we get that, as Jana Beth said, we do have our guiding question here. The Kentucky United We Learn Council was directed by board chair Lou Young to shoot for the moon. So this council was brought together almost a year ago. And before that happened, just a little bit of background. I'm going to go through this pretty quick because you are probably aware of it, but we did some work to find out what was working and what wasn't working in Kentucky. We did a survey. The commissioner did a listening tour. We had a coalition of folks who came together. A report was put out, and then this coalition or this council was then put together to implement the work that was a result of that report, and to really move the work forward. So when Chair Lou Young came to our kickoff meeting last November, this was her message to us: shoot for the moon. We have all this input from all of these different stakeholders about what education might look like in the future. So how can we make that happen? So my question to all of you is, what would you, as a member of SCAAC, choose as Kentucky's moonshot for education? So I want you to think about that as I go through this presentation, and I'm going to ask you all to put in the chat a statement that you think may, and you could do it at any time during my presentation, what you think would be a good moonshot for education in Kentucky. If you could say one thing that Kentucky would be on the right track if we did this, please do go ahead and put that in the chat whenever you're ready. Going to move forward to the next slide. The council is made up of 72 members. Our goal was to have 60 members and to make sure that they were all very diverse. So when I say diverse, I'm talking geographically across the state, demographically, and then also the kinds of stakeholders that we have involved. We wanted to make sure that we had teachers, educators, superintendents, but also students, also business leaders, also government officials. And so instead of 60 members, we ended up with about 75 starting out, just because to get that diversity that we wanted, we really felt like we had to have even more members. And there were a lot of people that were turned away. We went through an application process. We had some folks who were appointed based on their knowledge of education. We had a lot of folks who applied to be on the board. And we also reached out to superintendents and principals and asked them, are there in your community that you feel who don't normally have a voice in something like this at the state level, but you think would be a very good representative on this council? And so we received some names that way and reached out to those folks as well. We in April had our second convening, and that's when Audrey Gilbert was named as the chair of the council and Sarah Hatton was named as vice chair. Sarah has just recently resigned, and so we're going to be having a new vice chair in the very near future. The council itself is made up of 3 committees. So when you hear United We Learn is the vision for education in Kentucky, we always talk about those 3 big ideas of a vibrant learning experience for students, accelerating innovation, especially when it comes to accountability, and then building a bold new future. So each one of these 3 big ideas has become a standing committee which ends up forming the full council. So those standing committees meet on a regular basis. They each meet monthly and conduct their business, and then twice a year we come together as a full committee to make any decisions and to learn from one another. Audrey, before I turn it over to you, I do want to talk a little bit. You can click on that link that I put in there, and that link will take you to the Cool Council webpage. And I just want you to have this background information before Audrey shares what the latest on those standing committees. So if you click on it, you'll see that there's just a little bit of like what I already talked about. You scroll down and you'll see a little description for each one of those 3 standing committees. We talk a lot about inclusion, empathy, co-creation, and reciprocity. This is really important in all of the work within education. This was something that we started at least a year ago with just making sure that we are upholding these 4 habits. And then if you go down even a little bit farther, you'll see that we have a process map here. This is something that we just recently developed, and the intention is to really help people understand how we are implementing those 4 habits in the work, and just how the work flows from what's happening at the local level in education. So what's happening in the classroom or in the school building. Then our council members hear about that. They build a learning agenda and go out and really are interested in seeing how things are working there, especially those good things that are happening. That's really what they're looking for. And how can we expand on that? They meet together, they talk about the good things that are happening, they talk about how they could ramp up on those things, and then they talk about any policies or practices that may be getting in the way of other people doing those kinds of things. And the idea is that we make some changes there and put those recommendations for changes in front of KDE, in front of the board, and ultimately in front of legislators if need be. And then those are what will end up getting implemented. So before I go any further, I'm going to turn it over to Audrey, and Audrey will pick up on the 3 standing committees.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everybody. First, I'm going to talk about the Bold New Futures Committee, which focuses on engagement with communities as well as policy changes that we're looking at with the Kentucky United We Learn Council. So our most recent meeting was in July, but as of this slide, we're talking about the June 5th meeting, where we really engaged in that empathy process by having our members go out and ask people in their communities and people outside of their own networks to really assess the portrait of a learner possibilities for implementation, things like graduation requirements and that. Our committee, which that's the committee that I'm on, our committee ultimately would like to look at what it would be to change those graduation requirements to incorporate Portrait of a Learner. And we are presenting to the board in the August meeting about Portrait of a Learner, but also just about what our committee's been doing so far. So next slide, Karen. Yes, so we've already had that meeting, but you can go back and watch any of these meetings on the Watch Live portal and join anytime live. So Accelerating Innovation met on June 5th as well, and we had a joint meeting with the Bold New Futures Committee, really looking at those graduation requirements, what that would look like for accountability and assessment practices, setting those new 6-month goals. That's something that we've really prioritized with the Kentucky United We Learn Council, was having these goals to make sure that we're meeting them along the way and progressing as we would like to. They also recently met in July, but you can catch their meeting there. Next slide, Karen. And then the Vibrant Learning Experiences Committee, they've been working on their 6-month goal, which is looking at what the idea of vibrant learning is. Recently, they defined what they think vibrant learning is, and now they're going to be looking at how that's happening around the state. So really looking at the different ways that we are promoting vibrant learning experiences in our schools, things that are happening in classrooms that we want to highlight and bring forward to make available to everyone. And they, I think, will meet later in July. I don't think they've met yet. So
yeah,
yep,
they actually just set theirs for July 24th.
July 24th, and you can watch that on the KDE Watch Live portal and stay up to date with all of those meetings. So I think back to you, Karen.
All right, thanks, Audrey. So I shared with you the process map already. Let's see, I think the only other thing, we do have a monthly newsletter. Pardon me. So if you are interested in receiving that, it goes through what's happening in those standing committees on a month-to-month basis. And then just any other news that needs to be shared out as it pertains to United We Learn or the council. That all goes into the newsletter. Pardon me. We will be meeting again as a full council in November, so November 2nd and 3rd, and that meeting is going to happen here in Frankfurt. And we're really going to be focusing on that moonshot. Like I said, we've been at this, it'll be the 1-year mark at that point. And while there's been a lot of investigating, if you will, about what's happening in Kentucky, it's time for us to set that moonshot. You know, what is the big goal that we want to get out of United We Learn and this council? What deliverables do we really want them to produce? And we've got about 3 more years. This is based on a grant that we received. So we've got 3 more years to keep this council together with that funding. And so we want to make sure that all oars are rowing in the same direction when it comes to these 3 standing committees and what it is that we're trying to achieve together. So if you have thought about what that moonshot should look like, please go ahead and put something in the chat there for us. And I see Jana Beth has put as her moonshot that all students on grade level in reading and math ready to learn after high school to make a difference in the Commonwealth. Thank you, Jana Beth. I like that.
So again, just a reminder, the newsletter, I get the newsletter and I get updates. And so it's a great way to stay abreast. And I'm fortunate in my district, 2 of my members of the team serve on various councils. And so I get to hear some insight into how things are going. Great. I do have one question for you all. Yes. A lot of what I'm hearing focuses on the secondary world of K-12 education. We're hearing a lot about high school and how to transform high school. What are the conversations about middle school and elementary school and even preschool that might have been happening on the council?
That's a really good question. Audrey, I don't know from your committee if you guys have had any of those conversations, and I see we have Sarah on as well for Vibrant Learning Experiences. Would either of you be willing to share anything that's going on in your committees?
I will say with a focus on Portrait of a Learner, it's really what that looks like throughout your entire pre-K-12 experience, extending to see what that looks like along the way, not just to meet those graduation requirements, but how you can develop those skills throughout your time in public schools. But also really with accelerating innovation, seeing how we can change things that aren't just at that final level, what those different steps are throughout the way. But I'll open it up to Sarah to talk about Vibrant Learning Experiences as well.
Thanks, Audrey. Yeah, I would just emphasize as well on the Portrait of a Learner perspective. I think as Chair Young has often said, one of the reasons in shifting even the language, right, was around the perception that this is not something preparing students only for graduation from their high school experience, yet it guides them from their PK-12 experience as well. From the Vibrant Learning Experiences Standing Committee perspective, we have certainly been putting an emphasis on capturing resources and examples of what vibrant learning looks like in real classrooms in the state across elementary, middle, and high school levels. So we will make sure we're doing due diligence to seek out those examples and go on site visits and really make sure that our learning is spread evenly across all grade bands that we can possibly
get into those classrooms and see. So definitely a point of emphasis for us as well. And thanks for bringing that up, Janabeth.
And then Jennifer Stafford is on innovation. Jennifer, anything you want to add from your committee?
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen, and good morning, everyone. As a representative from the Accelerated Innovation Committee, there is a lot of discussion about early childhood and literacy, and what that looks like as far as a portrait of a learner and the focusing on literacy and numeracy in those early grades, especially. So, and then another focus is underrepresented student demographic groups. So how the innovations work across all of our students in our different populations. So a lot of discussions at this point. We're doing a lot of research, learning about what types of models for new innovative types of assessments and accountabilities.
Thanks, Jennifer. All right. Chuck Fletcher, he added a moonshot in there for us where students can use innovation education from elementary through high school. Excellent. Thank you. So that's all of our slides, but if there are any other questions, and if not, please continue to use the chat and put something in there for us. We really, like I said, we've got 3 more years of this, and November is when we really want to solidify what that moonshot needs to be. So your input is greatly valued. Thank you all.
Thank you, and good luck in your college career. Thank you for being a part.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're now it's kind of neat how we did this. So we got an overview, and you might have heard them talking about Portrait of a Learner. And Meredith and Sarah are here to dive deep into Portrait of a Learner. And I think the key question is really a good one, and that is, how might districts operationalize this Portrait of a Learner? So I'm going to turn it over to our team.
Thanks, Janabeth. The last time that I was with you all, I shared that the Kentucky Board of Education approved the state level Portrait of a Learner in October of 2022. And we walked through the 6 knowledge, skills, and dispositions that the board identified as those critical elements that we want all of our students to develop as part of their public school journey in Kentucky. Today, we really wanted to talk about where we are in the process of thinking through the so what. Now we have a state level portrait. Many of your districts have adopted locally developed portraits that identify those knowledge, skills, and dispositions that are important to your communities. But how do we use those portraits to really transform the student experience? So we are thrilled to have with us the amazing Sarah Snipes from the Division of Innovative Learning, and she's going to talk through the supports that the department has developed around Portrait of a Learner implementation and guide you through that question of how can you operationalize the portrait that your district has adopted.
Thank you, Meredith. Exactly. So from the United We Learn work and now into our Portrait of a Learner conversations, I think something that has been just crucial to all of this has been leaning into our local communities and our districts to first learn from what they're doing, learn from their learning, and help that shape what we're doing at the state level as well. So even from the development of the statewide Portrait of a Learner as a model, that of course, as I'm sure Meredith had shared from you in the previous meeting, was created from those local districts' input. We took about 11 districts at the time back in 1819 who had already developed a local portrait and brought those folks together to help create essentially what you see now in the state's model set of competencies. So we're excited to continue this journey of learning from our districts to guide our work and work alongside them. Meredith, if you want to go on to the next screen there. What we found as we were following along with district journeys at the local level was that we've gotten a really great handle on developing a set of competencies with our communities, but then we're not quite sure sometimes where to go after those competencies get on this awesome poster that gets hung up in our hallways and talked about in our school buildings. So we started to dive into this notion of what does it really mean to implement a local portrait of a learner? So with the help of some of our friends, Susan Dougal, who is now with the UK Center for Next Generation Leadership,
She has a wonderful history in one of our districts of actually implementing a local portrait. And then she's also been spending a lot of her time looking across, even at the national level, what does it look like for districts to take a portrait of a learner beyond a poster and into classrooms where students are actually experiencing a shift in their everyday learning experiences. So she had created a continuum, a portrait of a learner continuum. And so you'll see here, while these won't always be linear, right? So while they're presented in such a way, just know that sometimes districts are working on these things that aren't necessarily in this linear order. So after a district has developed a portrait of a learner, they're likely going to publish that and make it publicly available in their communities. Then they might work on developing that performance assessment system in order to measure and see students' demonstration of mastery of those competencies. Then we take a look at how do we start to design instructional practices based on more vibrant learning experiences? How do we engage our community in instruction and assessment? Then we take a look at locally adopted policies that support continued deeper learning instruction and assessment. And that would bring us to this idea of a fully functioning instructional and assessment system built around the concept of a portrait of a learner. So what we did with this continuum that UK Next Gen had developed was we started to think, well, now we need to go back out to our districts and put this in front of them, right? See where they would report themselves in terms of an implementation journey. So Meredith, if you would go to the next slide, please. Back in November, after the board had finalized and adopted the statewide portrait of a learner, we started to go out and capture who has a local portrait. And from there, we've learned that at the end of last month, 42 districts have reported that they have a finalized set of competencies. 37 are in the stages of developing that, so in those local meetings to co-create those set of competencies. 21 are considering developing one soon, and 8 districts are not currently considering developing a local portrait. 63 have not yet reported to us, but we're still going out, especially through our co-op deeper learning teams, to see who is working on local portraits within their communities. So that's kind of a snapshot of where we are in terms of development status. Meredith, if you want to jump ahead there. So after we started collecting who has a portrait, we sent back out another survey, and that was really putting in front of folks, if you have a portrait or if you're in the steps of developing one, where would you place yourself along that continuum of implementation? So 40 districts have responded so far, and this survey only went out to those who reported they either had a finalized set or were in the process of developing. And for your all's interest today, I lifted up 3 focus questions that are more specific to the assessment and accountability pieces of this work. So we're going to look today at some data around how far they might be in developing a performance assessment system locally, where they are in instructional design practices that support vibrant learning experiences, and then what supports districts told us would be most helpful to their current or next step of implementation. And so we'll just take a deeper dive here. Out of those 40 responding districts, you can see here just the capturing of the data of what they've given us here. We broke down the work of a performance assessment system into a few different chunks and items for us to look at here. So part of this work would be to develop performance outcomes at different grades or grade bands. So what does this look like to be an engaged citizen, for example, at 2nd, 5th, 8th, and 12th? 5 districts have told us they have completed that work, 17 are in progress, and 17 have not yet started. So I'll let you take a look here. We also have common rubrics for evaluating performance, guidelines and examples of different performance tasks, student-led conferences, exhibitions of learning for formative purposes, and portfolio defenses for summative purposes. So you can take a look there. Quite a bit of consistency across the board in terms of who has completed the development of this performance assessment system locally and who is currently developing those. So just take a minute there to dive into those numbers. And I also want to pause, if you have some local experience with any of these three areas of implementation, feel free to chime in and talk about your own experience. Maybe you've been part of developing a piece of this performance assessment system in your local community. Feel free to type in the chat or come off mute to contribute to that conversation as well. All right, our focus question number 2. We asked our districts who have developed or are finalizing development of their local portraits, how far along are you in instructional design practices that support vibrant learning experiences? So you can start to see the connection to the United We Learn work more explicitly here. Looking at, do they have things in place to support project-based learning, learning through inquiry, authentic problem solving, conferencing with students, providing feedback and allowing for revisions, giving opportunities to allow for student voice and choice, deeper professional learning opportunities for educators. And just for context here, when they mark themselves as completed, specifically to the fact that they have a structure and ongoing system established and in place. And again, that's out of the 40 responding districts. And then our third focus question for today, that we've reached out to these districts to ask, what support do you need to move into that next phase of implementation of your local portrait? 70% of our districts told us that they would really appreciate some guidance to develop that system of measurement of the competencies. So we see this in the form of performance outcomes and indicators, those rubrics, student-led conferences, performance task, exhibitions, and defenses. So that's really where 70% of our districts need support to move into their next phase of implementation. We also saw that 63% of our districts really want to dive into those deeper learning opportunities more. Give us some support around project-based learning, those workshops, inquiry. And then 68% as well wanted support around community partnerships to support that deeper learning. So how can we lean in and help districts as they think about work-based learning opportunities, field trips, panelists, internships, and other opportunities as well. And so what we did in response to that survey, the 70% of those responding districts who emphasized a need for performance outcomes and indicators, we pulled together a group of teachers to help finalize that set with the addition of our 6th competency of creative contributor. And so with teachers from districts who had their own local portraits for quite some time, we brought them in from elementary, middle, and high school, and they actually helped co-create those performance outcomes and indicators. So we're really excited to have that resource that districts have indicated for us that they need most in their next step of implementation. And that is actually, I wish I had that with me today, but it's currently in editing and accessibility to be made public in the next week or so. But we do have that resource ready to roll out to districts in just a few days. So really excited to get that in front of them. And what that will help teachers do locally is really see a model for what does it mean, as I mentioned earlier, what does it mean to be an engaged citizen at that 2nd, 5th, 8th, and 12th grade levels. And from there, teachers can really work together to create those rubrics to start to measure the competencies, engage student performance around those local systems as well. So we're excited to be able to deliver that resource to our districts and keep the conversation going. Lastly, all I would like to do is drop a link for you in the chat. I know this has been a lot of data and a lot of information in a short amount of time today, but we are building onto our Portrait of a Learner webpage almost daily. You'll see as of, I think yesterday, actually, we have a brand new video at the top of the page that features some folks from district superintendent, to our board members who are all explaining a little bit about their experience and the need and why the time is right now for a portrait of a learner across the state of Kentucky. And you'll also see some exciting resources like a Portrait of a Learner FAQ document. So a lot of districts have come to us saying, what does it mean now that the state adopted a portrait, but we already had a local one? All of those types of questions can be answered there. And you'll also find some resources on the right-hand side of the page, like a list of those current local portraits. And we also have the survey that I've shared data from today. We also have that linked for districts who may not have completed that and want to chime in as well. So lots of resources, lots of great information coming our way, but we're really excited to keep learning from local communities. It's really made this work stronger.
Do you have any questions for us? And then, Janet Beth, I do have one related announcement before we pitch to Jennifer, but does anyone have any questions for Sarah or for me?
Sarah, I'll tell you, you did a great job presenting. Every time I wrote a question down, you got to answering it, except for one. So my question is simply, you know, Kentucky has started this work and several districts had kind of been in the forefront. Are there researchers looking at the impact of Portrait of a Graduate on outcomes? And where is that research taking place, if you know?
That's a great question, Jana Beth. I think it's definitely an area for Karen Dodd's team and our team to collaborate in the very near future. I will say that as the districts who would be the front runners in their implementation journey for the state, a lot of them are just diving into the academic competencies. So really developing a way to look at this even more closely tied to the standards, right? From the state model, we have that empowered learner that really ties closely to our standards. And now districts, Shelby County is the example that I'm thinking of here, where they're ready to dive into creating a set of academic competencies. And I think that's where we'll start to see even closer alignment to the types of data that you're expressing interest in. So I do know that we have several national examples as well. There are some districts that have been Kettle Moraine, as well as, oh, it's going to escape me right now. There's a school out in California, and it is escaping me, but they have been featured in several bodies of research around metrics of student success from a variety of perspectives. And so I'd be happy to share that, that research with you all as well.
What other questions from the committee? Okay, Meredith, I think we're good.
Okay, wonderful. If you do think of a question for Sarah or for me, just send us an email. We're always happy to engage in correspondence with the SCAAC members. I wanted to invite you all to provide feedback on the recently draft approved call to action document that the board developed as part of a collaborative effort with KDE staff, in-service teachers, and students throughout the month of May. Board members talked about what are sort of the non-negotiables for the board related to assessment and accountability. And so they developed some statements, some vision statements, and some sort of big picture goals that they have for the way that this work will move in the future. And we've compiled all of that into a document that we're calling a call to action. And the board, when they approved the draft in June, said that during the summer, they wanted to gather shareholder feedback so that they can strengthen the document, make appropriate revisions, clarifications, anything that shareholders felt like was lacking in the document, so that when they look at it in August, hopefully they can approve a finalized version that is prepared for dissemination. So Melissa has ready to go after the meeting an email inviting you to provide feedback via Google form, and of course, providing a copy of that draft document for your review. So please consider taking a few minutes to look through that document and providing some feedback to the board via that Google form link. thank you all so much for your time. And I think we'll pitch it back to Jana Beth for some more conversations about assessment and accountability. So it's very thematically appropriate today. Jana Beth, great job with the agenda.
Thank you, Meredith. And thanks again, Sarah. If you did not see, Sarah has dropped some research in our chat box. So make sure to grab that if you're curious. It does feature our own Bullitt County. So we are going to move ahead and make sure and move into the dynamic duo of Rhonda Sims and Jennifer Stafford. And I'm not certain who's kicking us off. Oh, it looks like Helen's up there too. So Helen might be joining as well. And the big question for the day is, what are the new opportunities for districts with the full implementation of the current Kentucky accountability system?
Well, thanks, Jana Beth, and good morning, everyone. This morning, we had a legislative committee, a subcommittee that was meeting, and Rhonda Sims, it was called there to talk about assessment and accountability. So we had to divide this morning. So joining me is Helen Jones. Helen is our branch, no longer our branch manager because she got promotion. She is the academic program manager in the Division of Assessment Accountability Support. So we welcome Helen to the conversation. This morning. I want to follow up on several things that we talked about in March. In March, we talked about some upcoming work that was going to happen around accountability. At that point, Jana Beth asked for some timelines and some information. We also, during that March timeframe where we got to talk with you, we got some feedback about wishing for assessment data earlier than we have. So I've got some really exciting news to share with each of you today around the process to release accountability and assessment results that is going to fulfill some of those requests that members of the School Curriculum Assessment Accountability Council made. So my big question here for the guiding question around this section is, what are some new opportunities for the implementation of the 23 accountability system? Because this is now full implementation of Senate Bill 158 back in 2020. As we mentioned with you multiple times before, Senate Bill 158 did change the accountability system pretty dramatically. It became effective, and we wrote the updated regulation 703 KAR 5:270, then became effective in November of 2021. That changed the accountability system that we had previously had in the state. We had the STAR system back in 2019. And then because of the pandemic, we had some accountability waivers from the U.S. Department of Education. And now we are into the new accountability system. We reported on it last year where we had current year results, but now we have a new component of change. Senate Bill 158 brought it into the accountability system. It really doubled the accountability system. Previously, for many years, Kentucky has reported current year results only. And when I'm talking about the accountability system, those are around the indicators that is exclusively listed in the statute around state assessment results of reading and math, state assessment results in science, social studies, and writing, progress toward English language proficiency, quality of school climate and safety, post-secondary readiness, and grad rate. So we've always had this reporting of current year status. And so with Senate Bill 158, it took status and added an element of what's called change. And what changes is that performance that's compared from one year to the next. or from the current year to the prior year. So it literally doubled the complexity of an accountability system. So we're working with our psychometricians and the U.S. Department of Education currently on our updated plan for accountability. It brought together these components of status and change into the indicators and then an overall accountability rating. So when you think about the accountability system for each, this is an example of an elementary and middle school in that it has an overall score. So what will be reported this fall will be an overall score. So that overall score is going to be a color. So the school for the accountability rating in district and the state will have an overall color. Now that overall color will consist of the indicators that school has or that's available. So in this example, you'll see that at the elementary and middle school, there are 4 indicators that comprise the overall score. And then each of those indicator scores will be included status and change. So to report, the indicators will also have a color. And then for status and change, you can see that status is from very low to very high, and change will be from increase significantly to decline significantly. So each of those kind of add to that overall score. So you can see from the bottom, we start with status and change. That contributes to the indicator scores, and then the indicators that are available at the school then contribute to the overall score. For the overall, I mentioned the overall designation will be the color rating that combines all of those indicators. And you can see that it's from blue to red, from highest to lowest within the overall designation. And how we get to that overall designation is dependent on the weight. So they're behind all of these colors and all these descriptive words, there are numbers behind each of those. So with the overall score that the school district received, there will be numbers behind those. And you can see the weights here at each of those levels. So you can see the values that were designated from the Kentucky Board of Education. When Senate Bill 158 was passed in 2020, we began the development of putting the new system in place and getting guidance from the Kentucky Board of Education. And this is the weights in which they decided upon. So the indicator scores will be multiplied by the weights to get that overall score. And at this point, I think I'm going to turn it over to Helen, who's going to take us through a couple of new graphics.
So thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. As Jennifer said, I'm Helen Jones, and I am still in the Division of Assessments and Accountability Support. Still have the opportunity to work closely with Jennifer. And so what I want to take you through this morning is some examples of what we think this will look like. As Jennifer said, we're still working through the nuances of what all of that entails. We're still going through the standard setting process, but this is how we are anticipating this will look. So we wanted to start with each example, looking at the elementary through the high school, because there will be different indicators that will be impacted as a result. So at the elementary level, for the overall performance, so in order to get to that overall performance, what we will need to do is take the combined status and change, and that will then the indicators will be comprised of the status and change for each one of those indicators. So as you can see at the elementary level, you'll have the state assessments results of reading and mathematics times that indicator times the weight from that was decided by the board. So for state assessments results for reading and math, it will be multiplied times 0.551. State assessments results for science, social studies, and combined writing is 0.4, and so forth and so on. So you'll have elementary. You will also have the English learner progress, and that will be times 0.05, as well as the quality of school climate and safety. So we would add all of those, and again, each indicator will be comprised of the status and change, and then we would add those together to get the overall performance score. Now, middle school, so for middle school, we will have very similar. So we have the same indicators for the middle school. So you have the state assessments results for reading and math, science, and social studies and writing, plus English learners. The difference here, though, is look at the weights. So the weights will, again, be reflective of the decision that was made by the board. So you will have the combined status and change scores based times the weight based from the board. And for middle school, so you will notice for elementary, it was 0.51. For middle school, the score, the weight here is 0.46. So you have scores for state assessments results for reading and mathematics times 0.46. The state assessments results for assessments results in science, social studies, and combined writing times 0.45, plus scores for English learners progress at times 0.05, as well as the quality of school climate and safety times the 0.4 to give you that overall performance. Now middle school, I'm sorry, let me get to the next one. And for high school, we have two additional indicators. So we would add to those indicator results. We would add the post-secondary readiness as well as the graduation rate. And again, you will see that you would have all of those indicators, which are comprised of, again, the combined status and change. And you would add, in addition to those initial indicators, you would then add the post-secondary readiness. And at high school, the weight as adopted and voted on by the board is the scores for state assessments results in reading and mathematics is now at 0.45 plus scores for state assessments results in science and social studies in combined writing times plus scores for the English learners, which is 0.05 plus scores for quality of school climate and safety times 0.4. And then at post-secondary readiness, the weight is 0.20 plus the scores for graduation rate times 0.06. And all of those would be added together. All of these indicators with those weights will be added together to give you the overall performance score. So let me stop here and see, do we have any questions here? So again, these are examples of how we anticipate this could come together. Again, the work is still taking place. Currently this summer, we still have the standard setting that will be taking place to give us these numbers, and that will be taking place this summer. Any questions so far?
Helen, I'm not seeing any questions in chat either.
Okay, great. So this is then how this will be displayed. So part of Senate Bill 158 was that we had to then display all of this. So we will give this color rating. So again, as Jennifer showed you the initial, so the dashboard, this is also how we anticipate this could possibly come together. So this is another look at what we anticipate displaying in the fall. So we talked about how do we get there. So let's start talking about what has to happen to make all of this work to actually get us to those calculations and the display and the representation of what schools and districts will be seeing in the fall. So for the work that's taking place, the 2023 accountability standard setting that is currently in the process, let's take a look back. So in September of 2022, we convened, the Kentucky Department of Education convened a 26-member panel, broadly representative of persons and organizations with the knowledge and that were involved in the accountability system. So over 1.5 days, we had panelists that came together to review and revise the performance level decision and come together with the indicator and overall. We established the established indicator performance ratings through a multiple progress. There was a couple of rounds that they looked at the data. The stakeholders had an opportunity to look at the data, and based on 2 rounds of evaluation, they established the overall performance rating for status. So this took place in 2022. Then after that, then there was a meeting and evaluation and documentation, and had to be adopted. So the decision that took place as a result of the standard setting from last summer for status had to then be adopted and approved by SCAAC, which is the local Superintendent Advisory Council, as well as the Kentucky, as well as KDE, and that was the commissioner, and those for status was adopted. So now we want to move forward and start talking about what's going to happen moving into the fall of 2023. So we have a similar process that's going to be taking place. I do want to say this before I turn it over to Jennifer. So we talked about status. That's the current year. So Jennifer mentioned status. So now we're in the process of making sure that that full implementation takes place by repeating that same process to fully include change into that system. So for that, I'm going to let Jennifer take over and talk about what's going to happen in the fall.
Thank you, Helen. And so that accountability standard setting, we've got 2 wonderful members from SCAAC, Octavia and Jana Beth are both on the standard setting committee. So they're going to follow us and talk more in depth about the accountability standard setting. But we do want to note for you that it is a very public, transparent process, that there's principles that we follow when we have the standard setting. We want to make sure it meets all legal requirements of the policies that were set forth in Senate Bill 158 that we mentioned. It's reflective of those policies also from the local superintendent advisory council, as well as the Kentucky Department of Education. So we've worked with the Center for Assessment, which is Brian Gong, Laura Pinsino, and Chris Domaleski, who is actually facilitating those meetings. And we want to make sure that the panel that we have is representative of all of Kentucky. So we've got going into this year, we have expanded the number of participants that are involved and have invited a number of the people back from the 22 standard setting that Helen mentioned. We felt like inviting everyone back to have that consistency of thinking and understanding the process would be good. Many of the members that were a part of the standard setting in 22 were able to be part of this standard setting that we are conducting in the in 23. So we do have that consistency, and we've added new members as well to have some new perspectives and into the work. It's a very structured process of standard setting that the participants look at data. They are able to think for themselves and understand the data first. And they've got some individual reflection time. Then they move into like table discussions, and then finally there's whole group discussions. So it's a very structured process where they're looking at data, thinking about what it means at these different levels, and it's a well-documented process. As you can imagine, it's very structured, and you should be able to see the 5x5 table, or the grid table. So the standard setters are actually going to look at the data around these, and they will be the ones that determine where along these cut points along the continuum of data that separate each of these different determinations. So if you look at this table, think about in those columns from declined significantly to declined. So if you look at that column, there's numbers behind that, and the standard setters will be looking at and determining what the cut is along those data points that would distinguish between declined significantly and declined. So look at each of those different lines and think, okay, that's a decision point for our standard setters. And then, because it's a level-based system, they've got to make that determination for elementary, middle, and high for each and every one of those indicators. So you can see the complexity in which the standard setting is. It's very complicated. It's a complicated system, and the work that the standard setters are doing is really, really important. So let me jump to then how we're going to get to fall reporting. Once we have that standard setting process available, we're going to, we've already started part of the standard setting, and Jana Beth and Octavia is going to talk about that. But we do have data, the assessment data that is coming. So accountability data is coming later. Assessment data, which is from Access, Alternate Access, the Kentucky, the college readiness, the ACT, kindergarten screen, post-secondary readiness, all of those pieces are already in the schools. So schools have everything that from those currently. We are excited to announce that tentatively and on August 4th, schools will have all the assessment data from the Kentucky Summative Assessment and alternate Kentucky Summative Assessment. So that means the individual data scores for all the students that took the assessment in the spring of 23 will be in schools and districts as of August 4th. That is exciting. That's an early release. I was hoping that that the member who asked for that was be here so that they could hear that. But we're really excited about the fact that that data is coming early because it's going to be a very helpful as schools, teachers are making curricular decisions, especially around individual students, so that they can see areas of strength for their students as well as areas of possible improvement. So those assessment scores will be in districts, for most districts, before the beginning of the school year. Now, some districts will have started like maybe the week before or so, because the end of July, several districts start at that point. Having the assessment scores in early August then meets the needs for the majority of schools. Okay, so looking at the timeline of reporting, we will have all in August, we will present those assessment scores for our schools and districts. But accountability, if we shift back to accountability, then we'll look at the quality control steps and the steps needed for reporting of accountability. And looking at the early August, we do what's called a fall data review. And during that fall data review, we ask schools and districts to take one last look at all of their students, to look at their demographics, if the student has been in the school or district for 100 days, and if any type of change needs to be made around their status for special needs or things like that. So we want to make sure that all of the demographic data is correct before we get to public reporting, because it's important to have the accuracy before we get to identifications. Once we get that taking place, we'll have the standard setting. We've already had one session of standard setting that Jana Beth again is going to talk about. We'll have that second standard setting where they're actually then going to look at the scores and have the data around the accountability pieces. We have to get the data correct in demographics first, then go into standard setting. Now, during standard setting, information around schools will be de-identified. So there'll be a number of schools data presented, but it will be no school name associated. It'll be like school 1, school 2, school 3, so that there's no knowing from the standard setting panel which school that they're looking at. So those recommendations will be determined in September. Then we go to SCAAC, because as Senate Bill 158 requires, SCAAC and the Kentucky Department of Education have to approve those cut scores. So that meeting is currently being developed and set. We're looking at early October. Then once we have those approved cuts, then we will be able to go to our district assessment coordinators with another step in the quality control process that we call Quality Control Day. And during Quality Control Day, at that point, schools and districts will be looking for any type of big systemic issue. So on that day, they'll get preliminary accountability data and be able to look at it and help us identify if there's anything that is possibly missing or incorrect before we go public with the data.
Jennifer.
And then, yes.
Jennifer, there's a question.
Okay, great. I'm sorry.
This is Chuck Fletcher, and I see there that you have on the slide public reporting around late October or early November, release of the school report card, which is good. I don't have a problem with that. But what I want to ask is, I see that the state is releasing this report, correct?
The school report card?
Yes,
Yes, we work with a vendor to release the school report card.
So what are the districts doing for PR to the communities to say, okay, here are our problems. These are things we're going to do in our community to make our schools better on test scores, or things we're going to perform. So is that been discussed at all?
Absolutely. I'll kick it off, and then Jana Beth is a district assessment coordinator who works very closely with her local. So she may have some insight, but so Jana Beth, I'll start and then I'll kick it over to you. So Chuck, what we do as from the state level is we give those early indications of around the quality control day, so that the districts get this initial look. It's not final, it could change. Then during the late October or early November, districts will have the opportunity before it goes to public release. They have the opportunity to see it. So we do some initial reporting to the schools and districts so that they can get the view of what it looks like for their school and district before it goes to the public. We call this time frame between the time we give it to schools and the time it becomes public. That's the embargo period. And that's the point at which that our schools and districts can then work with their administrators, their local media on crafting the message to move forward. And Jana Beth, I'll kick it to you at this point because you do a lot with your local.
Right. So Chuck, once the school report cards are live, there is a lot of public press releases that come from the department, but then most every local paper in the Commonwealth will do some kind of story. But that's just the release to say the data's out there. I think your question was dealing with when do we as a school system actually talk to our community? And what's great is you take the school report card and you move right into the school and district improvement planning process. And in that process, that there are required diagnostics where you analyze your data, you look for gaps in learning, and you have to report what you want to focus on. And all those things are due throughout the fall in various times. And so the processes have a little bit of overlap in them. But essentially, everyone in the districts are sharing with their stakeholders, here's our data analysis, here are the gaps we're going to look to work on this year. And then the entire school improvement plan, including all the diagnostics, has to be publicly posted on your website. And you have to include stakeholders in your committee to get to all those. And so it's a great process that goes hand in hand with the data release. And we can actually, it would be great probably at our next meeting in September to have this committee hear about the school and district improvement process, because that's how this information gets out to the community, in my opinion, in a way that is focused on improving student learning.
It's a great idea. Thanks.
Okay, so Jennifer had just finished up. So this timeline is pretty much the work of all DACs and the department and the OAA group were very busy in the fall. It is later than normal because of the new standard setting. So know that this year is the latest it should be. Pending no change in the accountability system, this will get tighter. And in fact, you'll see all the results and everything coming to school typically right around the end of September, once we don't have to go to SCAAC, and so everything will get faster and tighter as the accountability system stays the same.
Janet Beth, that is the goal. That is what that Helen and I and Rhonda, we hold on to that as a hope for us. Martha asked, I was, as you were chatting, I looked at the chat, and Martha was asking about, do schools and districts know that the assessment scores are coming that early? And we have, from the Division of Assessment and Accountability Support, we produce a monthly DAC webcast. Melissa Chandler is highly involved in that development of that webcast, and she actually presented at our July DAC webcast the information about the release of the assessment scores. So that is on our media portal. If you would like to watch that, that is out there publicly. And I've also put a link into chat for you to see that if you want to share that with anyone in your district. So, and we will continue to communicate with our district assessment coordinators from our office around the release of the assessment scores, and then also the accountability, as we're mentioning. Couple other things around the release of scores. We put out a number of resources to help our district assessment coordinators and schools communicate the accountability. We put out parent guides or parent letters. We put out PowerPoint presentation templates that can be utilized. We help prepare them for the public release. So there's multiple resources that come from our division in preparation for the release of the public data. And then, of course, Janet Beth mentioned that from the communications office at the Department of Education, they put out a briefing packet as well as a press release. Also, in the past, the commissioner has held a media release, media day, where he takes questions or responds to questions from the state media. So there's a lot that goes into communications around the accountability data. But again, those are two separate things. That the assessment data is coming out first, and the accountability data will be later. Now, I will make a couple of notes here around the release of data. We're currently working with our Office of Legal Services around the identification and classification for our federal reporting. Senate Bill 158 has this clause in there that we're really trying to research and come to an understanding of the federal classification piece. So when we have more on the identification of our federal classifications, in this, again, this full implementation year of Senate Bill 158, will provide additional resources and guidance on that, because it's looking like it's a little bit different calculation on that federal classification. So we'll share more with you about that, as well as our schools and districts. The other note that I did want to share with you that we are changing this year is around the assessment scores for our alternate Kentucky Summative Assessment. Our alternate Kentucky Summative Assessment is for the students that are of the lowest cognitive abilities. It's the alternate Kentucky Summative Assessment that they take that is reduced in depth and breadth from the regular Kentucky Summative Assessment. That is a small assessment, and in the past, we have released those scores on raw data points. Since it's such a small test, there has been issues around the scaling of that and the equating of that test from year to year. And releasing the raw data points has become not as effective of a process that we think that we could accomplish. So we are shifting the alternate Kentucky Summative Assessment scores from raw scores to scale scores. And those scale scores will be on a scale of 150 to 250. That's going to be new and different, but much needed to be able to reflect the student performance for our students within that population. So just wanted to note for you that change is happening, and we will be moving forward with that scale score. In that link that I put into chat from our July DAC webcast, Krista Mullins, our newest consultant in the Division of Assessment Accountability Support, explained that. And so you can hear a little bit more about that change in that shift. Okay, the last thing that we have for you is a couple of resources. We have the Accountability at a Glance that has been updated to, again, reflect the full implementation of Senate Bill 158. And then we are working through the summer activities resource, and that will be available soon. It's got to go through its last revision and then go through the communications for accessibility. So we've got a couple of resources that are going to be available for you as you try to understand and help communicate around the accountability system. So let me pause there and see what questions do you have, and let me check the chat here, see if we have anything. Did I hear someone?
No, I was just reading through this, Jennifer, to see.
Oh, okay.
Martha says, thanks for explaining, probably because I'm a community member and not from the school system, but I realize I don't know who our DAX is. Just text our board secretary to ask.
Okay.
Actually, it's all cleared up now.
Okay, great. Great.
I our board secretary, and she told me, and it was an aha moment, like, okay. Oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. I work with him on a lot of different community things and know him well. I just have never heard him referred to. I haven't heard anyone in our district use the term DAC or, I mean, we talk about accessibility all the time, but I think it's just because I'm not an educational professional.
Not many districts have a sole position of district assessment coordinator. They
and they wear many hats. They wear many hats.
They wear many hats.
They tend to wear many hats. Yes.
And that would be the case with ours. Will Black, he does so many things that made sense when she sent me his name. I was like, oh, of course.
Yes.
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 Thank you all.
You tell Will I said hello when you talk to him.
Thank you. He's one of my neighbors.
Okay, any other questions for Helen or Jennifer? So I will tell you this, a couple commissioners ago, they used to talk about being able to explain the accountability system in the line at the grocery store. Well, no, that's not going to be happening. And so I know Heather and I and our state organization, our support network for DACs, will be working to help everyone think about ways to communicate this more clearly in their schools, as well as Jennifer and Helen and their teams that they work with. And just want to publicly acknowledge how much they think about how to help the people in the buildings and the districts actually communicate this well. There's another group called the DAC Advisory that really focuses in on things like logistics and communication, and they KDE OAA, the Office of Assessment and Accountability, meets monthly with that group for input as well. So it's really great to be a part of those groups and to see things go kind of through revisions. But it is a confusing accountability system.
It's quite complex, Janabeth. You're right. And the fact that, you know, it seems like a simple concept when you say change. It's just change from one year to the next. But the implementation of it is quite detailed because of the differences within our school districts and the differences within the indicators themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It just is proving to be a challenge to get it, but we're there, almost there, and we'll look forward to sharing more in the future. And if there's no other questions, then I will turn it over to you to talk about the 2023 standard setting.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you again, Helen, for jumping in, and send Rhonda our, you know, we hope she had more fun. I doubt she had more fun over with her group than she would with us. So I did want to point out that Jennifer had talked about that accountability at a glance document. And in my opinion, that's what everybody who is concerned about schools need to kind of have in their hand as we move forward, because the system does get complicated and it's good to have that document. Octavia and I got to be a part of round 1 of the standard settings, and she wasn't going to be able to make this meeting, but I'll tell you a little bit about this process. And our experience was really, it's a tough 2 days. You're doing a lot of critical thinking and thought work. And the way the process works is you're on 3 different teams. And there are times when we're all together as a whole group getting information. And then there's time to think individually. And then you reach consensus as your team. And then the 3 teams share out and we reach consensus that way. And what we focused on were the performance level descriptors. We had no numbers at the first round of the meeting. And so we were able to really think about, from a holistic standpoint, what do we mean about change? How do we want that to influence things? What should performance level descriptors, and those are simply the words behind the kind of colors, what do they really need to point to and mean? And so we had a lot of in-depth conversation about change and about what the public would view, how public would view schools based on the colors. And we actually kind of collectively came up with a model of change that we hope will honor any improvement, even a small improvement. And that was one of our kind of tenets, is that we wanted any school, even if they only improve slightly, to be considered positive improvement for change. And we did that because of the high motivation that we think that brings to the staff and the students and the families at that school. So part 2 of this will be even more complex, because we came up with an idea and said to all the number people, can you make it work? And we hope they can. And what we will do when we come back is we'll take those performance level descriptors that are still in draft form, and we'll start applying it to actual school data. As Jennifer and Helen mentioned, that school data is not identifiable. They just call it school 1, 2, 3. And you are constantly looking at how the schools did and actually setting the cut points for what all the different colors and indicators and terms mean and the levels. And so I will let you know that I feel like the committees are very diverse. They represent a lot of stakeholders across the Commonwealth. They, in my opinion, I feel like most people get an opportunity to speak if they want to, but because of the structure, you really can share your ideas in a small group. And so I really feel like all voices are being heard. There's a good mix of practitioners who are working at the school level, at the district level, board members, state board members, and I think probably the best thing I can tell you about the work is for the 2 days that we're there, and we'll be there for 3 days in the fall, there's real commitment to the process, and people are attentive and they're doing the work that needs to be done to help accountability. We constantly go back to what does this mean in terms of accountability results, not just measuring where schools are, but propelling schools forward. And so I think that's one of those themes that comes up loud and clear. So I'll stop talking there. Are there any comments or thoughts or questions about assessment and accountability and the standard setting process? Okay, I appreciate you hanging in there. We've been an hour and a half, but we literally are about finished. So we won't take a break and we'll move on. And that is simply one topic before we get to the announcements. And that is about half of the group has expiring terms. And so over the next 2 weeks, you'll get an email from me and Melissa that simply says, do you want to continue on? All of the SCAAC terms are appointed through the governor's office, and they wanted to know if any member was willing to stay on or if they feel committed to move on to another opportunity. We know you all are very busy people, and we just wanted to get some input on if you would like to be reappointed, if that's a possibility. And so you'll be getting an email from me that lets you know if your term is expiring. I will also let you know if your term is not expiring. And if something has come up in your world and you can't fulfill your commitment to SCAAC, please let us know. We would like that process of governor appointments takes some time, and we'd like to get that ball rolling. Our next meeting is September 19th, and we'll be in the heart of the whole assessment and accountability season. I have down that we would like to bring in some people to talk. This was Chuck's idea. I put the school words to it, Chuck, but basically, how do districts and schools share their information with their community and get input? And so if you have other ideas as we move forward, please let me know. I do want to report on some standards, curriculum standards. So the science standards are out in the greater world now. So there are new Kentucky academic standards. So make sure that was from Crystal Rowland. And social studies are quickly on the heels of science. They're in some of the final review processes. So we hope to have those out as well. But science is live. And that means that schools can start thinking about how to implement the new science standards. I haven't done a thorough analysis, but I don't see a lot of changes just in my glancing. My science person is actually out on a week-long professional learning this week, but when I just glanced through it, I did not see a lot of changes, but there are new science standards out there. Any other questions, announcements, notes from the committee? If not, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
Madam Chair, Chuck Fletcher, I move for adjournment.
Okay, and Martha, would you second that? I saw your hand go up. Okay, all in favor, raise your hand and wave goodbye. Thank you, everyone.